Let me describe something for you. And while I do, I want you to think to yourself what it may be. Controversial national champions, arguments over whether to take the best teams or teams that win conferences, regional issues, and doing it all for the money. Maybe you thought I was describing modern college athletics in general or college football specifically. You'd be in the right level, but the wrong era, maybe even the wrong sport. This is what you don't know about the rivalry between the NIT and the NCAA tournament. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Hello, friends.
And today, or Jim Nance, and today we've got an often overlooked part of basketball history, the time when the NIT was the biggest postseason tournament there was, not the NCAA. Blake, speaking of the NIT, what is your favorite non-marquee sporting event?
If we're thinking about a sporting competition or multiple sporting competitions that are lesser known, lesser covered, lesser broadcasted, it would not be. My first instinct is not to go with a traditional sport. One thing that I have found myself enjoying watching a lot of is esports recently. So professional Call of Duty in particular has been particularly interesting to me recently. It's just incredible to watch because like we all play video games casually, and like you might be the best in your friend group, or there's always going to be someone worse than you. But you watch professional video gamers, it's just it makes my head spin because of what they can do, like with relatively the same equipment. Like they're using a very similar controller, or they're using a very, very similar hardware, the same exact game, but they can do stuff that's just like way out of my mind. And so I find it, as much as I like playing, I don't have as much time to play, like actually sit down and play anymore. But watching other people play, I get a lot of satisfaction out of that for some reason. I'm just amazed at what they can do with it. Wishing that I knew what Twitch was 10 years ago in college, and who knows where I'd be today. Because I played a lot of video games back in the day, but man, I don't know. You never know.
You've been making some cash.
Straight cash, homie.
Yeah, I think for me, I would stick to regular sports, and they're not necessarily like undercovered, but I have always enjoyed watching the Women's College World Series and the Little League World Series. I'm a baseball adjacent person, so like and it's perfect viewing. Right, it's the middle of the summer, the middle of the day. You can just pop it on, watch. And softball games move pretty quickly. Little League baseball games move pretty quickly. So I think that would be my favorite. But on topic, I also many years make time to watch the Division II basketball national championship, partly because I went to a school that was D2 and they won it one time. But it's always, feel like when I was growing up, it was always like the Saturday morning of the Elite Eight or something like that. It was something where nothing was happening early in the day. So it was just kind of there. And so I like that one.
We're kind of biased for that, though. But yeah.
Can't help
it's
that.
Fine.
Can't help that.
We can be biased. It's our show.
That's right. It's ours. You can have your own biases as long as they're the same as ours. Nah, I'm just kidding. Kidding. Differences of opinions makes the world go round. As a matter of fact, here Today's episode is about a difference of opinion in a lot of ways in two very important institutions in our sports culture, both dealing with college basketball, the NIT and the NCAA tournament. To get our story started, it's important to remember what the NCAA's original purpose was and what it was started for. And that is simply just straight up a governing body to make rules that everybody could agree to. It famously began with Teddy Roosevelt calling several football playing schools together to meet with him because he was a sports fan. It's one of our previous episodes on sporting presidents. Several deaths had happened in college football, giving the sport like a real negative connotation in American culture. Roosevelt wanted to fix that. And so these schools got together with him to create the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States, which is a mouthful to say, the IAAUS, which I guess would have become commonplace at some point if that would have stayed the acronym.
I don't know.
But it became the much easier to say NCAA a few years later. At first, it only made the rules for the competitions that it supported. That was it. It wasn't a sanctioning body. It wasn't an event promoter. You didn't have to get permission to play games. Just here are the rules and have at it. The first time it had a championship was actually track and field, and that was part of a spat. We won't get into it between the NCAA and the AAU over amateur athletics and control over the Olympic selections at the time. That was the first time they made any kind of championship for any sports, which is okay because at the time, basketball was a sport that was very, very regionalized. It wasn't popular nationwide. Teams weren't going nationwide except on rare occasion to play outside of their section of the country. But it did start to grow in the 1920s and the 1930s, which led to the creation of tournaments. The aforementioned AAU was the first organization to put together any kind of tournament that had any kind of national pool, and they played in Kansas City. Remember, basketball, James Naismith is from Canada, but would end up coaching at Kansas. So that's actually kind of the birthplace of basketball in America. They played there in Kansas City throughout the 1920s, and that gave the model for 3 tournaments that were created back to back to back. In 1937, James Naismith, who I just mentioned, and Emil Liston worked together to create the National Intercollegiate Basketball Tournament. They pulled 8 teams from Kansas and its neighboring states in 1937. Make sure I say the right year. And then by 1938, they had 32 teams in Kansas City, all right there in the city. They played all day. It was a several-day affair, back to back to back. And this became the National Association for Intercollegiate Athletics, which we now know as the NAIA. That is one of the oldest, or the oldest, national tournament still in existence today. It's run every year since 1937, with the exception of 1944 for the war and 1920 for the COVIDs. And it's been in Kansas City all of those years, except for some reason 1994 to 2001 when they played in Tulsa. Because
why?
Who wouldn't want to go to Tulsa, Blake?
Well, like you said, the Kansas City thing makes sense because of the origin of the sport itself. But who's in Kansas City thinking, like, if we couldn't have it in Kansas City, what would be our second choice? Tulsa. Like, I don't know how you come up with that. Like, I feel like there are many other cities that are closer, big cities that are closer, that would have made a little bit more sense. But back to the NCAA thing. Starting as just a simple governing body, I'm sure there are. I'm almost positive there are plenty of people today who would love it if the NCAA would just go back to being a simple governing body making rules and not actually running anything. I don't know how you feel about that, and I don't know that we have time to like like that could be its own episode, like the origins of the NCAA, and if you ask some people how bad they manage college basketball today, but it I'm sure if some people could go back in time and change a few things so that NCAA doesn't run everything, just makes the rules today, they'd probably do it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it a conspiracy theory, but I have thoughts that some of the weird decision making and bumbling of stuff is on purpose, because the NCAA is just the schools that make up the NCAA. Like, that's what it is. They can make the rules anytime they want to, change the rules however they want to, but we all have like this super negative opinion of the NCAA, but not the institutions themselves. And I think, much like commissioners take a bad rap for all the choices the owners want to make, I think the NCAA as a whole is like the target for bad PR, while we're still just like, rah, rah, let's go team. We all hate the NCAA,
I
right?
love my school, but the NCAA sucks. It's like, no, it's probably your school, but whatever.
So yeah, but yes, I'm with it. I'm one of the people that's like, yeah, the NCAA could do better, but at the same time, it's like, but does anybody want them to, really? I don't know. Would Jay Billis still have a job if the NCAA was perfect? That's a good question. um, the Who knows? The success of the NAIA tournament. Let's also define what success was in this era. By 1940, they were drawing 15,000 fans for the duration of the tournament. That's total attendance. So a little bit lower bar than what we're used to. But that success in 1937 led to the creation of the National Invitational Tournament in 1938. Now, this was created by Ned Irish, who's a businessman in New York City. He's a sports enthusiast. He stumbled into an on-campus college basketball game in the 1920s, and he recognized that the gyms they were playing in were very small. They were very packed. People were dying to get inside, and correctly assumed that the game had outgrown those spaces. And so he began to promote games between New York City teams at first, but then New York City versus outside teams in Madison Square Garden. Now, not the one that exists today, but one of the precursor Madison Square Gardens. And he did this sometimes with 3 games a night, a triple header. We talked about in the Jim Valvano story how he grew up being like, I want to be the nighttime game in the Garden. That's the goal. They were playing double headers by then. This dude is promoting 3 games in a night. Which,
man,
hey, if you like basketball, there you go. I don't know if I'd sit through 3 games, but there's your choice. The games he promoted led to him wanting to create a postseason tournament that would bring together teams from all over the country. And so they created the NIT with 6 teams at first, would expand to 8 relatively quickly. But the first NIT in 1938 with 6 teams, so 5 games, drew 45,000 fans. Now, that version of Madison Square Garden only sat 15,000 to begin with. So they're getting close to selling out multiple games of this postseason tournament. And some of the teams are not even from New York City area. The success of this tournament sparks Phog Allen of Allen Fieldhouse fame in Kansas to create a new tournament. He liked the NIT idea. He actually wrote to Ned Irish and said, you're on to something here. This is a great idea. He wanted to nationalize the game of college basketball. He wanted it to be a big deal everywhere. He's a basketball coach. Of course he does, right? That's number 1, job security and financial security. But number 2, it's what he likes. It's what he enjoys. It's what he does. He wants to spread it everywhere. And so he starts working on how to do this. One of the ways he's interested in is the National Association of Basketball Coaches. That's the thing that's still around today. He's one of the founding members of that. And between him and Ohio State head coach Harold Olson, they get the idea for that association. And I know we're going through a lot of acronyms here. I promise we're almost done with all of them for the show. But the NABC decides to put on their own tournament. But instead of doing it on their own, they actually want to partner with the NCAA to put the event on. So it's the coach's idea, but they want the rulemaking body, the governing body, to put it on and promote it for them. And they do. The first tournament in 1939 was played, and the finals were in not Kansas City. And they lost $2,000 on the whole ordeal. Oh. Negative money for them. And so Fog Allen looked at the situation and said, hey guys, look, first of all, this was a great idea. We appreciate the thought everybody's put in here, but we're going to play the tournament in Kansas City now. Right. And that idea instantly turned them a profit. So now we're off and running. We got all three tournaments running. The two that we're focusing on, the NIT and the NCAA, back-to-back years they get started, and we're done with acronyms. So that's good.
Whew. Well, and to speak on the multiple acronyms, actually, it's this college basketball is not immune to an idea in basically every sport that was going on in about this time, where there were numerous renditions of ideas, specifically leagues. If you think about promoting like Major League Baseball, there were a ton of different leagues, the NBA and the ABA, and then you got like, I mean, every sport had multiple leagues until finally one kind of reigned supreme, right? And so, again, like any other sport, like we've talked about numerous here, this is not, college basketball was not immune to this idea. Everybody at the time had their idea. They were steadfast. And then it was really just a matter of financially making it worth it. And like the ones that made the most money kind of emerged. So I think that's interesting that idea is not unique to professional sports, like the ones that we've talked about in the past, but it also sort of, in a way, infiltrated college sports.
Yeah, and I wish we get more of this. I wish we get competing leagues and people trying to upset the apple cart a little bit more, because that's how you innovate. You know, that's how you get better at stuff is through competition. So I wish we'd have a little bit more.
Yeah,
but we're gonna pause our story right here because it's time for Blake to do some trivia. Now, this is going to be either the easiest or the most difficult question that he has ever had to answer.
See, you're setting me up for failure. That's the vibe I'm getting right now.
Definitely not. All right. It's more of a task than it is a question. And I can adjust the difficulty as we need to go. And this is for the people at home too, right? So you've heard of, I don't remember the number, but it's like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever, right? Where like you can relate everybody in Hollywood back to him in some way, right? He's like, this person was in a movie with this guy. Yeah. All right. So we're going to play that game. We're going to play that game with college basketball coaches. Okay. You have to connect James Naismith, the creator of basketball, to, and I'm giving you 2 names. This is already your first hint. You got to connect James Naismith to first-year North Carolina coach Hubert Davis and current Vanderbilt coach Jerry Stackhouse. And it is a surprisingly low number of connections.
Okay. All right. So basically naming the people in between them.
Yeah.
If you will.
How do we
like
get
how they are associated one person at a time?
Yep.
Working back. I'm going to work backwards. That makes the most sense to me.
That would that's going to go well for you, I think.
That's going to work. I think that's going to work better. So I assume that Stackhouse and Davis. Well, let's start with Davis. Davis is now the head coach, but was an assistant under Roy Williams. Roy was an assistant under Dean. Now, Hubert played for Dean, I think. Yeah. And Stackhouse also played for Dean Smith. Is that the right
These
time?
are all
That is the
statements.
right time.
These are all statements of fact so far. Yes.
That is the right time. Okay. Well, let me think. Dean was an assistant before he came to Carolina, but where was it? I am not old enough for this to be like immediate common knowledge. Dean came from. Why do I want to? Dean came from a military school, didn't he? Wasn't he an assistant at a military school? Who am I thinking of? Oh man, Dean was under. No, was Dean under? Y'all are probably yelling at me right now too. I can hear it, like just like the listeners just yelling into their headphones right now.
Come on,
who are older than me, who might know what I'm talking about.
You should keep going. Keep going with your thought process. I'll stop you if you get too far gone.
All right, so Dean would have been. I don't honestly cannot remember where Dean coached.
So
no, wait.
Okay. All right.
Okay, wait. Roy was the head coach at Kansas, but what didn't Dean? He was a coach or an assistant coach at Kansas, so like they were related that way too. Oh man, I don't know this part for sure.
You may get this with 0 questions, but do you want that to be a question?
For clarification, was Dean Smith ever a coach at Kansas?
Dean Smith was an assistant at Kansas from 1953 to 1955. For the record, you were also right about him coming from a military school. He left Air Force to go to Carolina.
Okay, so Kansas, Air Force, then UNC. Okay, so if he was an assistant at Kansas, then he would have been an assistant to Fog Allen at Kansas. Is that the same time? Was Fog Allen still there? I don't know when Fog Allen retired.
Yes, Fog Allen was Dean Smith's coach and first employer.
Oh, his coach too. Okay, I didn't know. I didn't know Smith played at Kansas. Okay, well then, does that mean that Fog Allen either was an assistant or played for James Naismith at Kansas?
Fog Allen?
That'll be my question.
That's your question. Fog Allen played basketball at Kansas from 1905 to 1907 under James Naismith. Yes.
Whoa. That is, you're right. That was incredibly short.
Yep. James Naismith coached Fog Allen, who coached Dean Smith, who coached first-year head coach Hubert Davis. We could get from the beginning of basketball to the man who beat Coach K at his last game with just 2 people in between. That kind of blew my mind.
That's incredible.
But I mean, basketball is our youngest sport, so like on some level it makes sense. But also, that's the dude that invented the sport 2 people away from on a direct line to Hubert Davis. That's how. Because when you started with Roy Williams, I was like, oh no, he's going to go off the rails. No, we don't have to have Roy in this. But sure enough, there it is. Yep.
Wow, that's incredible. I just learned something about. Yeah.
Learn from the dude that learned from the dude that learned from the dude. That's it. Yeah, that's kind of blew my mind a little bit that we're that still that young in the sports history that we could just jump. Which all those guys coached for. I didn't
realize the roots in Kansas. I didn't realize that Carolina, obviously Allen and Naismith were rooted in Kansas, and I knew Roy was there. I just didn't know like the in between part, like where did Smith come from? So that's like the connection I had to make. I didn't realize that at first.
Yeah, those two schools, those two schools are essentially like kissing cousins, like European monarchs or something. They're all the same family, all the same family. Just
Oh, that's
Good for him.
weird.
The family tree has one branch. All right. Um, so, all right. All right. Back on. Let's get back on the
Woo!
rails.
Let's
So,
go.
we've got the tournaments formed. So, let's talk about the actual rivalry because that's why we're here. The NIT had an early edge on the NCAA tournament because it was in New York City. That's where most of the media was located. I said it was a regional sport. It was a sport that didn't have a lot of ties outside of like local focus. So being in New York City gave it that extra oomph. People knew about the NIT because it wrote about it. Also, that tournament made more money. They also decided to pay the expenses for teams who showed up, and they shared a big percentage of the profits each year. On the other hand, the NCAA tournament was in Kansas, which at the time is okay, but it's Kansas. It's not New York City. The NCAA had to be begged by the Coaches Association to pay expenses. They were not originally going to do so. You had to get there yourself, stay there yourself, handle it all yourself if you wanted to play. But eventually they acquiesced. And they also shared profits, but it was a smaller percentage of a smaller pot. So you make more money. At the end of the day, that's kind of, you need a little bit to make the thing go. And you made more being in the NIT than the NCAA. The Helms Foundation is a group that puts together or was created by one guy. It's called a foundation, but it was created to put together and decide on who was the national champions before we started crowning national champions. In early college basketball, the AP poll didn't exist. There was no agreed upon tournament, so nobody really knew who the national champion was. The Helms Foundation sought out to fix this problem. They recognized the NIT champ in the first year it was played, when it was the only tournament around, and in 1939. They chose a team who was in neither tournament in 1940, and they chose the NCAA champion in 1941 and 1942. So in the first 5 years the NIT existed, the NIT was given 2 national championships, the NCAA was given 2 national championships, and one was given to neither because Army did not go to either tournament in
I was going to say,
1940.
who would that have been?
Yeah.
Army.
And you're actually so when you look at who went to these things regularly, some top 5 and top 10 teams didn't show up to either spot. And you're not always sure how or why, but they just did not always pick who, some rankings today would call the top teams. The tournaments were also organized differently. The NCAA chose one team from each of the 8 districts it had chosen around the country. Only one. So like in the South, where the Southern Conference and the SEC are both playing big-time college basketball, they're only taking one of those, not both. Just one team from each region. The NIT was set up to choose the 8 best teams, kind of like the college football playoff.
I was gonna say something, but I figured you would too. So yeah, I'm glad
Did
you
they
said
pass
that.
the eye test though? Did Army pass the eye test? There's no TV.
He's got good arm talent.
Yeah, they can really spin it. The NIT always chose. They went out for the best teams, but remember, it's a New York City thing. It's put on by a New York City organization. At first, writers, and then a group that was mostly still writers but had a different name. So they always picked 2 New York City metro area teams. That really left 6 at-large selections for the rest of the country. But they would go all over the country, to the Rocky Mountains, Pacific Ocean, all the way to New York City to find the teams they wanted to play. We get an answer to the question, which team is better, which tournament is better, starting in 1943. And we can get some answers, but in typical college sports fashion, it's kind of answers. Starting in 1943, with World War II raging, charity sporting events were all the rage. Sometimes, I found a quote that I just thought was cool and worth sharing about these events. Somebody said that in the case of these sporting events, the charity got everything except the proceeds. Because every time they would run an event, they would take and extract like huge amounts of costs All right, we got to pay for this. We got to pay for this. We got to pay for this. Here's your money. Here's your cut. It's nothing, but here you go. But the NIT and NCAA agreed starting in 1943 to play benefit games for the Red Cross. And they actually gave the profits, not even the profits, like the full amount of proceeds to the Red Cross. And the game would be between the NIT champ and the NCAA champ. Easy enough. We're going to pit ones versus ones, see who wins. Both tournaments moved their finals to expedite the process. Both tournaments moved their finals to Madison Square Garden. The NIT played their whole tournament there. The NCAA played their East Regional, the 4 teams from the East, and the Final 4 in Madison Square Garden. In 1943, the NCAA champ, Wyoming, back when they were good at basketball, beat NIT champ St. John's and raised $20,000 for the war effort in the process. That's one game, $20,000. And we're going to skip ahead till 1945. In 1945, Oklahoma A&M, who we now know as Oklahoma State, won the NCAA tournament and beat DePaul, the NIT champs. They had Hall of Famer George Mikan, huge center, who was kind of hurt and fouled out after just 14 minutes of game time, and Oklahoma A&M cruised. So in those 2 games, the NCAA champs are victorious. I skipped 1944 for a very specific reason. In 1944, the NCAA champ was Utah, and they beat NIT champ St. John's in the Red Cross game. It's not so simple as to say the NCAA won that situation because Utah had originally played in the NIT. The NIT happened one week, the NCAA happened the next. They lost in the first round of the NIT and then got asked to fill in for Arkansas, who had a bus accident, could not make it to the tournament. They filled in for Arkansas and won the NCAA and then beat St. John's. So they won the game on behalf of the NCAA tournament, but had just lost in the first round of the NIT. So that's kind of circuitous logic there, where it's not real certain which tournament they actually benefits from that situation. So the way I see it, it's either 2-1 or 2-0-1 with a draw in there. But either way, the NCAA is favored. And even the papers in New York, by 1945, the New York Times was openly admitting in a postseason preview that the NCAA may be the better competition. But yeah, we get charity games for a national championship. Maybe that's what we need in college football. We need a charity game to make sure we know who the champion is. Put Central Florida against Alabama.
All I know is that if I was St. John's, I'd be pissed. That's what I got out of that was wow, we win a national invitational tournament, and then we have to play this other team. Oh, we lost one. It's fine, whatever. Oh, we win the NIT again. Oh, we have to play a team who got knocked out of the first round of our tournament that we just won. They got knocked out in the first round. We got to play them. Oh, this is fine. No, we lost. Oh, I'd be mad. Especially if there was any money on the line, like charity, maybe be like just like the Harlem Globetrotters out there doing whatever they're doing. But like, man, if there was like legit stakes on the line, I'd be angry.
Yeah, same. Now, in public, nobody recognizes these games officially as national championship games. Some of the coaches later would say, like, everybody knows this is technically the national championship. Like, it's mythical, but it's something we're doing right now. And neither side could, however, use these as PR, like, pat yourselves on the back situations. The NCAA tournament could not publicize how happy they were about winning against the NIT, because if they did, they would be acknowledging that the NIT was their equal in prestige, right? If you're happy about winning, there must be a reason for that, right? You're not expecting to win if you're excited about it. So they couldn't acknowledge it. And obviously the NIT couldn't say anything about it because they keep losing. So like they're not going to mention it at all. And so neither side brings it up. And so you will find I said the New York Times said that maybe the NCAA is a better competition, but you will find from 1945 into the 50s publications still saying that the NIT was the better event because the NCAA couldn't go out of their way to say, no, it's us, because they didn't want to acknowledge the NIT was the thing.
Right.
Now, everybody knows that if we're going to talk about college sports in the late 40s, if you've listened to our episode on the City College of New York, you already know where this is going. College sports in New York in the late 40s means gambling. And so let me tell you a little bit about the gambling. During their shared time in Madison Square Garden, Fog Allen, remember he's the proponent of the NCAA tournament, he frequently alleges that gamblers are trying to get players to throw the game. As Kansas coach, he's saying, hey, they keep coming to my guys wanting us to throw games all the time. He also levied accusations that Ned Irish himself had interwoven gambling into the basketball culture in Madison Square Garden. Irish, for his credit, did acknowledge that gambling was a problem, but basically told Allen to stay in Kansas. He said he didn't need Allen to comment on the situation in New York from Kansas City. So why don't you stay over there, Fog, was essentially the idea. In 1945, the speculation was proven true when 5 Brooklyn players were expelled from school, admitting to working with gamblers. Like we were shaving points. It was this guy, like they admitted to it straight up, got expelled, almost canceled the 45 season for the New York City schools, but they continued to play. And rumors would continue to fly. The late 40s Kentucky teams actually ended up saying that they definitely were given point shaving opportunities in the NIT that they declined. But both tournaments would have this targeted at them through 1950. And in 1950, we do get one of the cool things that happens. City College of New York wins the NIT and then shows back up the next week and wins the NCAA tournament, becoming the first and last teams to do so, which was a thing from our CCNY episode 2. This all comes to a head in 1951 with the CCNY scandal, but it goes bigger than that because 32 players from both NCAA and NIT teams from the 1948 to 51 tournaments were prosecuted in a gambling sting. And
Bang,
that's a big controversy right there. 32 guys.
That's a problem. Like, you want to talk about a PR problem. You think the Washington Commandos has a PR problem? Like, just imagine what this was like in the 50s. And media is not like it. I mean, like, this could stay relatively localized, right? Because you don't have the big national news. Like, no one's got the internet. No one's like scrolling their Twitter feeds in 1951 looking for stuff to talk about. And so, like, this was a problem. And if it like, imagine, I guess my point is, just imagine this happening today, or imagine something of this scale happening today and how bad it would look.
Yeah. And the thing is, it happened in New York City because that's where the gamblers were, because that's where the stuff was. If this had happened in Kansas, maybe it does get swept under the rug, right? Maybe it doesn't show up, but it's in New York City. And that puts an extra emphasis on it for the time period, even without the Twitter and stuff.
Absolutely.
But that is the turning point. So you will frequently see 1951 as the delineation between when the NIT was better or the equal of the NCAA tournament and when it all starts to fall apart for the NIT. And it really does kind of immediately start falling apart for the NIT. Now, the NCAA would not comment on any of the gambling. They never launched an investigation during the late 40s. They never pushed for anything. And if you ask why, to quote Hamilton, follow the money and see where it leads.
Get into the weeds.
Yes. The last NCAA tournament that played finals in Kansas City profited $1,300 total. The last finals, that was in 1942. The last finals they played in Madison Square Garden 8 years later in 1950 profited $105,000 total. So why are they staying in New York City, even with the gambling all around that they know about? Because they're raking it in. They're raking it in, right? Things don't change. Things aren't new, right? They're doing
Nothing
it for the
is
money.
new.
The reliance on that money, and it still happens. Remember back in 2020 when they canceled the tournament, that there was a big concern that a lot of sports were going to suffer. A lot of championships might have to be canceled because the NCAA relies on NCAA tournament money. That was going on in the 50s. Because of this reliance, they continually expanded the tournament to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. First, they went to 16 teams. Then they went to 24 teams. As they did, they went from one team per section, 8 regions in the country, to guaranteeing all qualifying conference champions with a berth. You win your tournament or your conference, you're getting a bid. This was both a blessing and a curse to the many independent schools that still existed because they could be used as field fillers. If we didn't have enough conference champions, we're going to pull some independent teams. They're only taking one team per conference, right? It went from one per region to one per conference. So we still need some independent teams. But some independent teams looked at this as the NCAA favoring teams in conferences and said, you know what? We're not going to play in your tournament ever. And so they committed to the NIT. So the NCAA kind of fueled their rival for a little bit. Several high-ranking teams in the newly formed AP poll came along right in the 1948 season. Several teams highly ranked in that played in the NIT because the NCAA either didn't want them because they were the second best team in their conference or because they were independent and said, you know what, we're going to play over here in the big city. In 1951, as I said, the NCAA moved the finals from Madison Square Garden, but still saw a huge success, proving that the game was now nationally popular and people kind of knew about it. And this really made them start feeling themselves. By 1954, the NCAA passed a rule that said you could only attend one postseason tournament. Couldn't play in the NCAA and the NIT, had to choose one or the other. Partly because both tournaments had expanded to the point where they weren't happening in 1 week. You couldn't schedule them off time. You had to play in one or the other. In part to kind of squeeze the NIT out, right? Play in our tournament and that's it. You can, like I said, see teams, there were top 5 and top 10. Before that, prior to this season, they played in both tournaments, right? They were conference champions. They played in both. Top 5 teams played in both. But that stopped or started to become less and less as the years went on. By 1962, the NCAA negotiated a deal where their bids would be extended to all teams 1 hour before the NIT could do their bids, which seems petty. Like you're just...
I was about to say we're getting petty.
Like you could just wait. Like who's not going to... if you're sitting there, if you're like weighing your options, I could go to either one. And the NCAA phones you and says, we're giving you an at-large bid, all right? You're going to hang up, and then you're going to wait an hour. And if you want to go to the NIT, you're just going to wait an hour. And like that's just, it's just petty. But they agreed to it, so whatever, right? But I don't know. By 1968, that changed to a 2-hour head start because that makes all the difference. As late, though, as 1970, number 8 Marquette, led by Coach Al McGuire, boycotted the NCAA tournament, got his bid, found out what region he was going to be playing in, said, I literally do not want to be in this area, don't want to go there, not doing it. And he said, I'm not going. And he decided to go to the NIT, and they won the NIT after boycotting it. So it worked out for him. He said, I'm not going. That would be the last time anybody did that. Because it was such a high-profile event, and it was definitely a high-profile coach, the NCAA in 1971 made a rule that said if you got an NCAA tournament bid, you either went to the NCAA tournament or you were ineligible for postseason play. You didn't have a choice anymore. You either played in theirs or you played nowhere.
And so
Squeeze.
it begins. And so it begins. It's funny how like it's just the people, not necessarily the greatest product, but just the person with all the power, the person with the rule making ability, the person with the money, just comes out in the end somehow because they have the resources, right? It's like who was it recently that was it was some, I think it was somebody in sports recently. They were trying to sue somebody, they were trying to sue some humongous entity, and they were like, you could sue and we can be found liable, but we're just going to appeal. And then on that appeal, you're probably going to win, but we're going to appeal again, and we're just going to keep appealing until you run out of money. Like they were I cannot remember now what it was. I hope I remember before this cuts off, but I can't remember what it was, but that was the thing, is like they just have all the resources to just make somebody miserable, and like they're just going to come out on top at the end. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a frequent, like, that's, I mean, and I get why the bigger event or the bigger corporation, the side with more money would play that way, right? You're playing to win, and that's a strategy. I think we'd all look at it and be like, you know what, that's kind of dirty, but definitely a thing. Speaking of lawsuits, we got one coming up here shortly, but after that rule was made, the stigma that we all know about the NIT, that it's a losers tournament, it's the not in tournament, it's the lesser event, you're playing for 69th place, that kind of stuff starts to seep in. So in the 50s, 40s and 50s, right, it's a prestigious event. You want to go. Teams are skipping the NCAA to go to the NIT. But by the time we get to the 70s, right? Remember in 1974, there's the big ACC final between State and Maryland. They're both top 5 teams. It goes to like quadrillion overtimes, and it gets called the greatest game of all time, in part because both teams wanted to win because they were the only one going to the NCAA tournament from the ACC. Well, in 1975, right, in 74, State was on the good end of that. In 1975, NC State was on the losing end of a similar situation. They lost in the final, couldn't go to the NCAAs, and David Thompson, on the record, called the NIT, quote, a loser's tournament, which seemed to be the death knell. NC State did not play in the NIT that year. They said, no, thank you. We don't want to do it. This is not it, and started a trend. Throughout the 70s and 80s, you will see a list of teams who were high-ranking, did not get chosen until the one team per conference rule was lifted, didn't get chosen for the NCAAs, and just stayed home. They didn't go to the NIT. They didn't want a consolation. They didn't want anything else, even though some of those teams are really highly ranked, right? The NIT could have held on to some prestige, but it just didn't. It fell off to the point that in the 1980s, the NIT briefly lost its television contract before ESPN picked it up. And in 2005, they actually first filed this lawsuit in 1985, but it actually went to court for the first time in 2005. They filed an antitrust lawsuit against the NCAA. The committee that runs the NIT claimed that NCAA rules requiring the acceptance of their bids were an unfair practice and violated antitrust laws, which, when you think about it, kind of does. They intentionally also claimed they intentionally were trying to put the NIT out of business. This was right when they expanded from 64 to 68 teams. So taking at least 2, because, in reality, taking 4 NIT teams
Right.
and putting them in the NCAA. Said they were trying to bankrupt them. And there was definitely something to the suit because the NCAA settled. Now, to your point about the way they conduct business, they settled by buying the NIT. And the committee, the Metropolitan Intercollegiate Basketball Committee, was dissolved as the NCAA took over. The NCAA originally agreed to run the tournament for 10 years, but has since continued to this day. They re-upped for another 10 years through 2025 at the end of that first settlement. To their credit, they've made it better in many ways. I think there's still the stigma, right? If you're from a big conference school, you don't make the NCAAs. A team that's on the rise may think an NIT is a good spot to be in, but frequently it's not. But what they have done is is create an event that didn't exist before, right? They made it so if you won your conference's regular season, you got an automatic bid to the NIT. So some small conference schools get a shine in the NIT where they weren't before. And so it just gives you an opportunity to be that. And it's this good kind of David versus Goliath, big versus small thing that college basketball is built on and the month of March is built on. I think it could still be better. I think if they ran the last 8 in Madison Square Garden like a conference tournament, just play like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of Final Four week when nothing else is going on, that would be awesome. But it's still great.
Yeah. Yeah, it could probably be better, but again, because the NCAA has their cash cow, they're putting that thing in like in the Cowboy Stadium now, where they could sit like 70,000 people to watch a college basketball game. Like that's absolutely ridiculous. So I guess what you're saying though, like the turning point in '75, we can just blame State and David Thompson for all of this.
We got too much pride to go to that tournament.
The losers tournament,
except like 15 times in the last 30 years. You know,
but other than that, well, I'm not going to comment on State's performance this year, so I'm going to leave that alone. That would not be nice. But back to it being better, right? Like it could definitely be better. It could be shown to more people. Like they could find ways to make it a little bit more self-sustaining, I guess. But ultimately though, what do you have, right? You have like, think about like the Gonzagas and the St. Mary's. They're both nationally ranked by the end of this thing. Gonzaga won the tournament, but St. Mary's is still probably going to make the NCAAs, and they're a pretty good team. Like they're ranked 23rd nationally, but the third place team in that conference is probably getting like, I don't know who it is. This is just off the top, but they're probably getting nothing. And so you got that team who might be a decent seed in the NIT. They're going to be playing like the ACC's 6th, 7th, 8th best teams. That's just not the same. So it's hard. It's just hard to like. I mean, I don't know. The competition level in the NCAA could also be figured out. Like, yes, winning a conference, you should make it, but winning like the 25th best conference in the country, and then you're a 16 seed, or then you got to play in. Like, yes, you get a bid, but it's not. You're not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere with that unless you go on like a UMBC run and like upset Virginia, because we will never forget that happened.
Never forget that number 6. That's my favorite meme. I love it. Yeah, I really like the kind of modern NIT. I really do. It wasn't my favorite non-marquee event, but I really like it. Like, there's a chance that UNC Greensboro last year, or year before last, could have been playing in Madison Square Garden, even though they ended up losing in the second round, I think. But a school like that could make a run, right? It's just kind of cool. Some final facts here. The 1940s and 50s in college basketball obviously was a wild, wild west situation. There's not a polling agency. There's not an agreed upon national champion. The NCAA, to their credit, if you look up who is the national champion each year, the NCAA recognizes only the NCAA tournament champions. They don't even call it. We understand that it is the national champion, but in their record books, you're the NCAA champion, so they get away with only recognizing their tournament teams. The Helms Foundation has named alternate national champions. Some schools like North Carolina acknowledge Helms Foundation championships as national championships. There was a poll created by ESPN when they created the Almanac of College Basketball that has a different list of national champions. Schools claim that. Several of those champions played in the NIT, but there are 4 schools that claim national championships that you have to search for in lists of national champions. Matter of fact, I didn't know one of them. Blake had to answer one time all of the schools with multiple national championships. San Francisco is on that list because they won 2 NCAA tournaments. San Francisco actually claims 3 national championships. because they are one of 4 teams that claim national titles solely off NIT wins. DePaul in 1945, we mentioned them losing the Red Cross game. Utah in 1947, San Francisco in 1949, and Holy Cross as late as 1954 when they were still a major basketball power. Sorry, Bill Simmons, they are not now. But those 4 teams have all claimed NIT or national titles solely off NIT wins. They are the 4. Other teams obviously got them, but there you go. I would look if NC State wanted one of them deals. There should be a banner. Like,
better claim it.
You gotta claim what you can claim in college sports, because at the end of the day, we know that that's all there is. It's perception. It's not. None of it's real. It's just whatever you claim. Whatever people say on in media is what it is. So
it is
claim what you can get. I do have one parting shot, though. I just want to point out that the tournament that took teams based on region and conference beat the tournament that picked the quote unquote best teams.
That is interesting.
No parallel, unrelated to anything in today's sports, just no parallel at all. But
no.
Yeah.
We would never do anything like that here.
Nah.
All right, just fun parting gifts. All right.
Yeah, that's
Take
right.
that for what you will, everyone.
Got anything before we go?
It's a great story. More people should understand. More people should understand the origins of it, because it is an interesting story. And now everyone has to go download this so that they are also informed. That's all I got.
All right. Thanks for everybody for listening. If you got a great story, hit us up so we can tell it to everybody else. And thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.